All right. Hello, Cross Media 141. What we're going to do today is I'm kind of going to walk through and take a look at a sample file that I've given you, and basically this will start out as a black and white image, and the goal is eventually to colorize it. So what I've done here is I have shirt colorization, skins, hair. As discussed in class, it's also going to be centered around non-destructive workflow, and that's the goal that I hope you get out of 141 is understanding workflow. You may not understand every tool in Photoshop, but you need to understand to work non-destructively, use non-destructive tools as much as possible. They also allow you to make quick changes. So we'll take this as an example here. What I have up is the layers panel on the right here, and much like Adobe Illustrator, these are controllable to turn on or off aspects of the layers. So again, I have my background layer, which is the image. I then have the shirt, the skins, and the hair, and I've separated all these. If we take a look at the hair layer as an example, there's a little arrow next to it, and I can click that, and it will spin down and show me all the sub layers within. So we're going to focus on this today. In fact, what I'll do is I'm just going to hide my skins and hide my shirt. We're going to take a look at what I have here. First, I have an adjustment layer, and this is actually a clipped adjustment layer in that it's made to only affect the hair layer, which I've isolated below it. So what I'm going to do is just double click this adjustment layer, and it's going to pop up, and you'll see that there's color control. So I have this set to colorize, where that box is checked, so that it will actually tone the grayscale of the image. And I'm going to take and just slide this to adjust to show you basically we have total control over adjusting this. So if the client said, you know what, I don't like this sort of fuchsia looking hair, I want it to look more realistic, well, I could pick something that falls more within the realm of realism to a certain degree, and I could tone that hair to better blend. Or if we wanted wildness, I could certainly go right back to that too. So the idea is it's only affecting this, and the effect can be turned on and off. So I'm not physically changing pixels in any way until I actually export the image. So this is just that, sort of that non-destructive method. All right, so along with the adjustment, we're also going to take a look at what it's tied to. It's tied to a copy of the image which has a mask applied to it. If I turn off the background layer, you can see only the hair. So I've kind of intentionally done this. I've made background copies and utilized masking so I can isolate and turn on and off those elements sort of in concert to see how they work when laid over the background image. So what I'll do is go back to this. And in order to understand masking, you need to work with channels. And you'll be using this a lot. So I find it nice to maybe pull out the channels tab instead of jumping back and forth. So I'm just going to left click and drag that over because I'll be referencing that a lot. And if I want to, I can save a workspace, much like in Adobe Illustrator. I made a workspace for a vinyl project. I could go in and save a specific workspace for this if I wanted to. But let's go back to my layers here. And if you look at the layer itself, let me go way in on it. We have the layer icon, so this is the copy of the layer. And then we have this thing that's black and white next to it. And it may be a little bit tough to see in the thumbnail, but the white indicates the area of the hair. And this has just been actually painted on. So when you think of masking, basically the color white is going to paint visibility. The color black is going to block visibility. And grays in between will give varying degrees of visibility. So like a 50% gray tone would be half transparent. So for this activity, we're primarily going to be using just black and just white. In this case, the white to paint the hair. So if I go over to my channels tab now, you'll see that you have red, green, and blue channels, RGB. You have all the separations, and then you also have a channel. Essentially, this is an alpha channel, a visibility channel. So if I click it, it's going to turn it on with the mask applied. Now this mask, I can double click on this channel thumbnail. It's going to pop up. This color means nothing. It's just a visual reference so you can see where there is mask and where there isn't. I've painted in the color white here to remove mask. Everywhere else is going to be indicated as black because it is masked. And I can change this color, depending what you're doing sometimes. Like if I were masking an object that was blue, I may not want to have the mask layer indicator be blue, so I could change it to be red or whatever I want. I can also set its opacity too. If I put it at 100%, it'll completely block out the image. So I like to have mine at about 75 so I can see through it still. Alright, so that said, with the mask layer selected, what I'm going to do is go and actually work with painting it. So we're going to have all these tools that are in the toolbar on the left hand side, and we can collapse this to be easier to see or expand it. I'm going to leave mine collapsed. And what I'll do is go in and look. Now what you want to find is the brush tool. Now this can get a little confusing because there are selection tools that look like brushes. There's a history brush tool that can be used to basically paint on and off states of imagery, but I'm going to go in and pick just the standard brush tool, or hit B. And when you do that, you get a brush by default of a certain size. If you look in the upper left, you can select the brush area, and you can physically make the brush larger or smaller. I can also make the brush more or less hard. So right now it's at 50%. I can go to 100% or 0%. Think of it like this. If you're working with a spray paint can and you spray very, very close to a surface, it's going to have a very hard edge. That would be 100% hardness. If you move the spray paint can 3 feet away from the surface, the edge of your line is going to be very soft because it's going to have a larger mist to it. So that would be less hard, and you get a softer look. You can kind of see in the hair that I've used a pretty soft brush because look at the edge fall off in the hair. It's very soft. So the tip is softening can often be used as a blending tool so that you don't have hard edge transitions when you're working with this kind of stuff. So I'd pick like a 50% brush to start for hardness, and then just a size that fits for the image. And what I'm going to do is, again, I have that channel mask selected right now. Oops. If my computer's not going to freeze up, here we go. I have that channel mask selected right now so I can see what I'm manipulating. And I have a brush selected. And what you'll notice is that there are 2 colors that are by default. What I should see in the foreground or background color is black and white, depending how you have it set. Right now I have this set to basically paint on mask that is pure black. So if I double click on this, you can see that my RGB values, and I'll use RGB for this conversation, my RGB values are 0, 0, and 0. That means 100% black. So if I paint with 100% black on, so I'm just going to click and drag to paint, it's going to paint essentially the mask in. And what I should see is my thumbnail's going to change. If I release, boom, there my thumbnail has changed just a little bit. If I make my brush bigger, and here's a tip, if you use the bracket keys on your keyboard, you can ratchet up and down the brush size. And this actually applies to several Adobe softwares. If I go in like this, I mask out the hair. Now if I turn off the channel like this, there's the result. My mask has now only affected that channel, and if I play with my color that I've tied to that mask, it's only evident where the mask area is. If I turn it back on, I could go back and re-edit that mask if I were to go back to it. So this layer, turn the mask back on, and now I can re-edit. Now what I'll do this time is, instead of utilizing the color black with my brush, I'm going to utilize the color white to basically paint visibility on. So if I double click it just to show you, white in RGB is 255, 255, 255. So I know I have pure white. And as I'm working, I may flip these back and forth with the little flip key. Quick tool for that is you can hit X and X will flip too. But I'll work with my white, take my brush size down, and I'm just going to paint back in, oops, work with my white. I'm going to paint back in the hair. Put my brush size larger for now if I want to. And what you'll find is you really need to go in on the image and get into detail. And work with painting specific elements. So you may need to change your brush sizes and make them very, very small. Now, one thing that's worth noting is I'm using a mouse right now. So while you can't see it, my scroll wheel allows me to easily move in on the image. In addition to using Command, plus and minus, some of the basic concepts that are the same as Adobe Illustrator and many other softwares to zoom in and out. But I can go in and paint this all I want. I'm being pretty sloppy right now. You could really refine this. And if I paint on too much, I'll just switch the color. So I'm going to hit X, so I have my black, and I can just go paint off as I'm working. So when I get going, there we go. I have the hair painted in, and again, I can shift the color if I want to really easily by working with the adjustment layer and just pushing it back wherever I want it to be. Now, one other thing that you'll find useful when working with this is the history bar. If you make a bunch of changes and you're not sure what happened, this little icon in the upper right is going to give me the history panel. I'll click on that. This will show me everything I've done since I've had the document open. And you can set this in your software preferences as far as how many states it will hold. But just to show you, I'll go backward in time. Backward, backward, backward. Everything that I've done so far is contained within that history panel. If I want to see where I started and where I've ended up. So I'll close that. All right, so that's the introduction. If you can just play with the layer, even just one layer to start and manipulate it, it's a good start. And again, it can go to all the other elements too. I could go to the skins and play with just those, or the shirt and play with just those. And these are all essentially set up the same way. I've just used a copy of the background layer, an adjustment layer, which has been clipped to it, and I'll cover that in the next video, and then non-destructive pushes to change the way the image looks. And I'm colorizing a black and white image, kind of neat. All right, so that'll be it for this video. In the next video, I'll show you how I actually built this stuff. Like, how do we go about actually making this? That would be a good question.